Pastor Adefarasin, who is now weighing in on Nigeria's deepening crisis. The senior pastor of House of the Rock Church, Pastor Paul Adefarasin, sparked a heated debate online after he described Nigeria as dead, bluntly stating that anyone who counts their wealth in Naira is poor. Adefarasin made the comments during a sermon on May 17th titled Becoming Who God Says You Can Be, the sequel, where he spoke about how much value the Naira has lost through the years. Let's take a look.
Nigeria is dead. Let's not deceive ourselves. Let me tell you something. I'm going deeper. Let me tell you something. Once you're counting in Naira, you are poor.
Very poor.
I was not born poor. My father's salary, his last salary, in the 1970s or 80s, I can't remember when it was about 18,000 Naira. That was money. Let me make it clear to you. How much is $1 billion Naira today in dollars?
Less than $1 million.
Or 1.4 billion Naira. How much is it in dollars? Only $1 million, Perry. Do you know what $1 billion Naira was when I was 15, 16? $2.8 billion.
So you see, that's at that time. You see?
$2.8 billion. And we're taking it. Because we live in the now. We don't study history. They wrenched it out of our academic systems.
Yes.
And we don't research data to project our future, to know what tomorrow will look like. So we're not doing the critical thinking. So we have no combatant against our subconscious foolishness.
Okay.
that determines our behavior. Nigeria is dead. This is what Pastor Paul Adefarasin said from his pulpit. And people are reacting because he said it out loud. What many Nigerians are. Now, as we approach 2027, the question is, does anyone in power care enough to attempt a resurrection?
I just believe, I disagree with Pastor Paul Adefarasin. I don't think Nigeria is finished. I don't think Nigeria is finished. I think the day the people wake up in Nigeria and stop the shenanigans of our leaders, the country will jack back up. I don't think Nigeria is a hopeless case. I think the day the people wake up, but as long as people are docile and everything. But what has he said that is not? Don't we talk about the energy? We have all become poorer. So if Pastor Paul is saying if you are earning in Naira, we all earn, when you alert for salary coming here, is it not Naira? When we see it, as the money not all gone before we plan. In fact, there are some people that I know that Dr. Abad, before the salary come, they've already even shot wasting on top of the salary. You get. So there are need for everybody. President Bush reform, we said it. It was going to destroy the lives and livelihoods of people. And it has done because it didn't also give us sincerity. People are still feeding facts. Till today, there are many corruptions. Till today, you know the matter of spending FAC for votes. That is, put FAC money.
Usually checking a patient's vital signs means, looking for a pulse. But what happens when a prominent religious figure looks at the economic state of a whole nation and just flat out declares it dead?
Yeah, it's a shocking diagnosis for sure. And it really forces you to look at the underlying symptoms.
Exactly. We're looking at a viral YouTube commentary breaking down Pastor Paul Adefarasin's bold claims about Nigeria's economic and political climate. Now, just a quick disclaimer, we aren't here to pick political sides at all.
Right, absolutely not. Our mission is just to synthesize these claims impartially, so you can understand the conversation on the ground, especially if you're completely unfamiliar with the recent Nigerian political climate.
Okay, let's unpack this dead diagnosis. So the pastor points straight at the math of inflation. He contrasts today's economy with his father's salary from the 1970s and 80s.
Yeah, his father made 18,000 Naira. And to really grasp this, we need to quickly touch on how fiat money works. A currency like the Naira or, the US dollar has no intrinsic value, right? It's just backed by public trust, right?
Exactly. It's all about belief. And back in the 70s, that trust was solid. That 18,000 Naira was actually worth roughly 18,000 US dollars, maybe even up to 40,000. It had serious, tangible purchasing power.
Oh, wow. I mean, I'm struggling to wrap my head around the scale of what happened next. How does a currency go from 18,000 equaling a fortune to what the pastor says today, where 1.4 billion Naira is only worth about $1 million?
Well, it's the result of a really long systemic devaluation. The source argues that calculating wealth by just looking at the raw numbers on a paycheck is deeply deceptive. When a central bank prints more money, the currency's value just drops.
So it's like shrinkflation at the grocery store. The numbers on a paycheck might look massive with all those zeros, but the actual chocolate inside the wrapper, like the purchasing power, has just vanished.
That is a perfect analogy. What's fascinating here is how the YouTube source argues this illusion of big numbers acts as an intentional political smokescreen.
Wait, a smokescreen? How so?
Well, they use a real-world state allocation example. Under a previous administration, a state given 500 million Naira was receiving about $1 million in real value. Today, a governor might receive 1.4 billion Naira.
Which sounds like a massive budget increase on paper. I mean, politicians can parade that number around like a huge win.
Exactly, but the underlying value is still just $1 million. Because the currency has been devalued globally, that massive budget buys fewer imported goods and builds way fewer roads than it did a decade ago.
So it cripples daily household purchasing power because everyday goods cost astronomically more. But the government can point to the raw numbers and claim they are doing more than ever. So what does this all mean? How do citizens hold leaders accountable when the math is that misleading?
It's incredibly difficult, and when the economic reality becomes this confusing and grim, citizens often look to faith leaders for clarity.
Right. Which brings us to the commentator's frustration with prophetic political commentary. Here's where it gets really interesting. The source points out the pastor's past election prophecies.
Yeah, specifically this biblical analogy he used. He suggested a Saul, like an unfavorable leader, would have to rule before a David, a savior figure, could emerge.
But wait, the commentator points out a glaring inconsistency there, don't they?
They do. The pastor previously advised citizens to create a plan B, to just, leave the country. Then he pivots to this Saul and David narrative offering divine hope. And now he's declaring the country entirely dead.
It's just shifting the goalposts. It's a classic way to hedge your bets. I mean, if you keep changing the prophecy, you're never technically wrong.
Exactly. But doing so severely erodes public trust. The commentator explains that when institutional voices offer these contradictory, shifting narratives, it just deepens the national confusion.
Right, because people are economically desperate and highly susceptible to shifting goalposts from authority figures.
Yeah, regardless of where they live, that's just universal human psychology.
So to summarize, you have this incredibly dangerous combination. The collapsing actual value of the currency, paired with shifting prophetic narratives that are just whiplashing public morale. Both are rooted in a crisis of faith.
Precisely. The currency requires trust to hold value, and cultural leaders require trust to hold authority.
Which leaves you with something pretty heavy to think about. Since the value of fiat money is ultimately based purely on collective belief, what happens to a nation's actual economy when the public simultaneously loses trust in both its financial system and its cultural leaders? When belief vanishes across the board, that's when you really have to wonder how a nation finds its pulse again. Catch you next time.